Okay, welcome to another stream. So we are live, and I'm a bit darker than last live, or maybe even last video. But I hope everyone is doing well. Welcome to the chat, Kodak. I also see that Matti and Daniel have put a message in before. I don't know if they're here right now, but the very first thing I'm going to say actually is that this is the first stream that I'm using ultra low latency. So, hey, Anna's in the chat as well. This is the first stream I'm doing that I'm using ultra low latency. So what that means is you can have latency is there's going to be people watching this that know way more than me, but basically there's a delay between my live stream going out basically and it actually reaching you. So when I say now, if I ask you a question, if I ask you to say put an emoji in the chat, right, you won't actually see that until maybe 10-15 seconds after I've actually said it, which is why often I'll pause while I'm looking at the chat to see you reply. But I've chosen ultra low latency. So what that means this time is that should mean that you pretty much instantly can hear what I'm saying. So if I ask you to put something in the chat, so let's say put a 1 in the chat if you can hear me. So now, so 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so so Anna, Jimmy, Kartik, Dad, Sneaky, Robert, Kodak, Level 4 Vegans are Cannibals, and Philip are all put ones in the chat, and that was about 5 seconds. So there's like a 5-second delay, whereas usually I use like a 15-second. So what that basically means is this can be the interaction between us can be much easier. Now, having said that, I don't actually expect this to be like a particularly interactive live stream. I haven't set it up to be that way, but it's just nice to be a bit more interactive. But the reason I'm saying that is because if there are any like connection issues, because your internet needs to be better for it to be lower latency, that's my understanding. If there are any connection issues, that's probably causing it. So then I might have to change it. And I don't know if you can change it midstream, but I'll try to. Anyway, that out the way. The next thing, the reason I'm a bit darker is because I've just gotten back from Vienna and I was joining Nimrod there and also a guy called Colin, who's a local guy. For any of you who don't know, Nimrod is an antinatalist activist from Israel. And he's been doing a tour of Europe at the moment, going around and doing two things. First of all, promoting antinatalism, talking to people about it. But the second thing is in the places he's going to, I think it's 33 cities. He is trying to start like local activist groups there. So hopefully when he goes around, people join him from the local area. And then after he leaves, they can still continue doing stuff. So even though I'm not local to Vienna, I wanted to support Nimrod and join him on one of his stops. And I've never been to Vienna, so I thought I'd join him in Vienna. So we've just finished that. Got a load of footage, so there'll be multiple videos coming out from Vienna. The first one's coming out tomorrow. I actually didn't think I'd be able to edit it this quickly, but I have been able to put the first video together for tomorrow. So the first video from Vienna is coming out tomorrow. It's fully edited already. If you're part of the supporter community, then you'll already have access to it because we have a supporter community Discord where supporters get access to all of the perks that comes with that. If you want to become a supporter, then there's a link in the description to the Patreon, and then you can join the Discord community. And yeah, we do monthly hangouts. Next one is this coming Sunday, and you get early access to videos, among other things. So yes, there's a few other things that I just want to reel off before we actually get into what we're doing today. So the next thing is, what was the next thing? Oh, the next thing was, if anyone feels like they want to support and donate it during this stream, I have tried to add like a new sound that comes up. when someone donates that is unique to this channel. And some of you have been watching my videos for quite a while, may know what it is, what this sound is. Yeah, those of you who are like newer or maybe haven't seen all my videos, then you may not. I can explain it if someone does donate and it comes up. But yeah, if anyone feels like they want to, then they can be the one that causes the big reveal to everyone. Not that it's a massive reveal. It's just like a, it's just like a funny noise joke thing. Right. The other thing that I want to say is very quickly, I am making my way through this book. So it is, as far as I'm aware anyway, the latest book to be released about antinatalism. So it's called Begetting by Mara Vanderloot. I'm not sure exactly how to say her name. But it's, I am maybe just short of halfway through it. And I'm enjoying it so far. How I kind of see it so far is it's going to be a good book to give to someone who is not philosophical, is not, not familiar with antinatalism. But if you've got someone who's a friend or just someone you're talking to who is a, relatively normal person who, does not spend all their time talking about philosophy, but wants to understand, what are the sort of like for and against ethical arguments for having a child. Maybe they've heard you discuss antinatalism and they're like, I don't want to get proper balls deep into the philosophy like you, but is there a way that I can get introduced? Because as a lay person, I just want to understand a bit of the ethical landscape around procreation a bit more. Again, I haven't read all of it, so I haven't even read, like, there's a whole half of it I haven't read yet. But so far, this book has been really good, very accessible. I've had a few new things that I've got from it. And a couple of pieces of inspiration for different videos I want to do from reading this book. So, yeah, I recommend. And also, if anyone has any friends that fit the description of the person I was just talking about, it's just my opinion, but I actually think this book would be quite good, because not everyone is the sort of person who wants to read Better Never to Have Been or something like that. That's quite dense. Right, and then there was something else I was going to say, but I've actually forgotten it, which is why I should have put a list in. Oh, the other thing I was going to say is I just wanted to actually going back to like people who support me in donations and stuff. I like want to give an example of where it goes to, because I don't want people to feel like, they support me in some way, or they send a donation on a live stream and it just sort of goes into the ether and they don't know, how is this materializing? So it materializes in a lot of ways that people won't see, for like subscriptions and stuff like that. That are all related to this channel or other things I do related to antinatalism. But one way that really, I don't know what that was. One way that actually really helped when I went to see Nimrod is I bought essentially like a new, it's not specifically for street interviews, or it's not just for that. But I bought like a new microphone set that's very good for street interviews and going out and talking to people. And we actually used that in Vienna. I took it with me, and it was really useful because I can attach the microphone to Nimrod just on his shirt, doesn't get in his way. And then I can be, 10 meters, 20 meters away with the camera, leaning on a lamppost or whatever, filming. With the receiver on the camera, and the audio goes straight into the camera. So the first video is coming out tomorrow. Check it out. The audio is not perfect because we weren't in perfect conditions. But the audio was, the audio situation is much better than it was before. So there's an example of how, things are materializing, and it was really useful in Vienna. It made the footage much better, and I'm going to use these microphones much more. The final thing I wanted to say before we get into what we're actually doing today is what we are doing today is, well, actually, I'll explain what we're doing today because the next thing I was going to mention is related to it. So what we're doing today is Matti Häyry, who I'm sure you're all aware of, is an antinatalist philosopher from Finland. And he recently, or I actually don't know if I'm getting all the details here correctly, but as far as I'm aware, he recently gave a lecture on antinatalism related to like the ones who walk away from Omelas story, and how some people or a lot of people, including myself, relate that to antinatalism. So he recently gave a lecture in person in Finland on that topic. It wasn't recorded, but he then did another version at home where he just did it to camera with animations, and that is now available for us online. So and Matti's in the chat. He says it was on the 29th of April at the University of Helsinki. Once I share my screen, I was actually going to read out some more details because it's in the description of the video. But yeah, so Matti gave this lecture and I wanted to watch it. And so I haven't watched it yet. This is not me having watched it with loads of thoughts and I'm like, I want to do a live stream and share all my thoughts. I do want to do a live stream and share my thoughts, but I haven't seen it yet, so I don't know what my thoughts are. I'm completely coming at this fresh. But yeah, so I thought let's do a live stream about it. The last thing I wanted to say then was this is presumably going to come, I don't know because I haven't seen the lecture, but presumably this is going to come up in the lecture. This is, has it focused? Yeah. This is Matti and Amanda's recent book. Matti Häyry, obviously, who I've just been talking about, and then Amanda Sukanik, who runs Exploring Antinatalism podcast, amongst other things. And they recently wrote a book together. It was released under the Cambridge Elements series. And I assume that is going to get mentioned here. So I just wanted to say you can get it available free online as a PDF, or you can buy a physical copy. Cool. I think that is everything. I'm actually going to move those books over there. So I think that is everything. And I think we can get into it. If I have missed anything, then I'm sure it will come up in due course. So let me share my screen. And just before we actually start watching it, it is called, Does the Omelas Argument for Antinatalism Stretch the Concept of Responsibility Too Far? And here's a bit of extra information. So it says, this presentation by Matti Häyry and Amanda Sukanik. Oh, okay, so maybe it's by Matti and Amanda then. They wrote it together. I'm not entirely sure. I thought it was just Matti, but maybe it's both. Apologies. Was originally given live in the University of Helsinki, Von Wright and Wittgenstein seminar on the 29th of April 2024 at the invitation of Professor Thomas Wallgren. And yeah, so, okay, well, let's get into it. I was going to say some other stuff, but we can get into it. So I actually downloaded it because the original video on YouTube, the audio is actually not that high. Now, if any of you watch it from home on your own, you can boost the volume from your end, but on this live stream, for whatever reason, I couldn't boost it too high. So I actually downloaded the video, put it into an editor, boosted it artificially, exported it. So we're going to be watching my sort of edited version, edited only audio. Everything you see and what Matti says is his own. I just increased the volume. Cool. Okay. So let us begin. And please let me know if you can hear this.
So, does the Omelas argument for antinatalism stretch the concept of responsibility too far? This presentation, given originally in the University of Helsinki's von Wright and Wittgenstein seminar, is based on one argument introduced in the book Antinatalism, Extinction and the End of Procreative Self-Corruption by Amanda Sukanik and me, Matti Häyry. Here is Amanda telling in 3 minutes what the book is about.
Antinatalism is a philosophy and social movement assigning a negative value to reproduction. People should not have children. Other sentient beings should not have offspring. Machine sentience should not be developed. In the best possible world, the cycle of suffering is broken. Many find the idea mistaken and unthinkable. Why suggest something like this when humankind has struggled for survival for so long? Why propose extinction when technology could eliminate suffering? And what could be wrong with passing on the gift of life? In this element,
obviously Amanda doesn't mean this, but she's saying it as if she was someone else. But if anyone is interested in the concept of the gift of life, not my latest video, but the one before that is called the Life is a Gift Debunked. So if you want what I think is a relatively comprehensive, although I'm sure it's not exhaustive and perfect, a relatively comprehensive debunking of the idea that life is a gift, then you can go check out that video. Also, actually, before we continue, I just want to say hello to a few other people in the chat that have joined. So Cami has joined. Welcome, Cami. Dr. Joe and Kevin. I think that's everyone who's joined. And I've just seen that Anna has asked, do I like the city? Well, I'm assuming that message is to me and that it's about Vienna. I will be brief because obviously we need to continue with this. But yeah, I really liked Vienna. I think I would need more time to explore all the different areas because there's a lot to do and see there. But I really like it as a city. The buildings are really nice, like especially in the center, all the governmental buildings and the old palace and stuff. I would highly recommend anyone to visit Vienna if you haven't already. Yeah, there's very good walking tours. There's very good places just to go and see on your own. There are very nice parks just to hang around in. And also, it's surprisingly good for vegan stuff. Like, I was really surprised. I mean, I thought it's a European city. I didn't think it was going to be bad for vegan stuff, but
we bring children in this world and we raise them to be warriors against evil.
So we've just had the first donation of the stream, and the sound came on, which actually confused me because I was like, I can hear it in my thing, and I was like, who the fuck is talking to me? I thought I paused the video. Well, thank you so much for the donation, and I've also just got the sun in my face. Thank you so much for the fuck me. There we go. That's a bit better. Thank you so much for the donation. And yeah, now everyone saw or heard what the sound is. So I'll replay it again just in case people didn't get it, and then I'll explain what it is for the people who maybe don't know. And also maybe this is not fun for anyone else, but I found this quite fun to add this noise.
We bring children in this world and we raise them to be warriors against evil.
So basically, I see that Cami's in the chat asking if it's Awaken with JP. It's not Awaken with JP, although I could have found stuff that was equally dumb that he would have said or did say. No, it's from quite an early video I did called something like Guru Fails on Antinatalism or something like that. And actually, I made a short with footage from that original video. I made a short from it. And that short is actually the most viewed video on my channel, I'm pretty sure. I think it's got, unless I'm massively misremembering, I think it's got 17,000 views now. And the next one after that is my Why I'm an Antinatalist video, which is also an old video, which is on 12,000. But yeah, so there's this guru guy, and you know how he's a guru, you're supposed to be very wise, all this sort of stuff. And he's asked to speak about antinatalism, and he just completely flops, he starts talking about how, like it says on that noise that just played, we need to make warriors to be we need to make children to be warriors against darkness and evil and all this sort of stuff. And it just becomes so cringy, like little child slave soldiers. Yeah, it's just a reference to an old video. Yeah, that guy's funny. Cool. Okay, but thank you so much for the donation. One, for the support, but also for testing out the new noise thing. Cool. Let's continue.
We answer these questions. The ancient Greeks, influenced by other cultures, realized that human life has no purpose. Why continue it then? Plato responded by creating a belief-defying metaphysical system. The world was created by an artisan god who had to work with imperfect materials. Human efforts are needed to complete the work. Early Christian sects relaunched the antinatalist challenge. Augustine of Hippo countered them by proposing that our earthly life is followed by a purpose-giving afterlife, if only we take our suffering in good stride. The challenges and responses have continued to this day. Western philosophy can, in fact, be seen as an endless struggle against antinatalism. If reproduction stops, species, including humans, will go extinct.
Yeah, sorry, my little box where I am, I can shrink it if you like, so that you can see more of the screen. But yeah, obviously that says extinction.
If our aim is to eliminate suffering, this is a good development. If our aim is to perpetuate life, not so good. Consistent antinatalism must come to terms with the fact that its consequence is the demise of species. At least for humans, this could be accomplished voluntarily. For some time, the possibility of human extinction was seen to count against antinatalism. Surely our species must survive. We question this premise. Opponents of antinatalism believe that reproduction itself gives meaning to our existence. Having children, raising them up to have more children, gives purpose to human life. We argue that while this is true, it is also the strongest argument against reproduction. It places parents in the horns of a procreative dilemma. If generations continue to follow one another, sooner or later someone in their line will have a truly miserable life. Parents raising their children to have more children will be guilty of creating that misery. They can avoid this by teaching their children not to have children of their own, but by doing so, they deny their offspring the purpose in life that they themselves achieved by reproducing. Either way, procreators are doomed to morally corrupt themselves.
Antinatalism is a phenomenon not many people know about, but it's breaking into mainstream media step by step. Helsingin Sanomat, Helsinki News distribution 500,000 ran a feature of me, slightly unfortunately with the title Human Race End Already, with an exclamation mark. I don't mind the human race ending, but I do mind the imperative implied by the exclamation mark. Let me explain. This is what I told the journalist, first thing in the interview. I am an antinatalist philosopher. Being an antinatalist philosopher means to me that I don't have children. I don't intend to have children. And I would be content if everyone acted like me in this respect. Content, I said, not over the moon, not telling people what to do, just accepting the consequences even if no one had children anymore. As it was, readers saw me telling them what to do and returned the usual responses. In the newspaper's comment section, why don't you kill yourself? In a nationalist news outlet, cultural Marxism is rampant in Helsinki News. And in Twitter X, of course, with a face like that.
All right, I tried to move myself out the way, but I've clearly fucked it up. So I'm covering this X post. The first thing to say is, in that response, when someone asked Matti why he doesn't kill himself, if you want to find out why antinatalists don't kill themselves, and when I say that, obviously I don't mean that no antinatalists ever killed themselves. That means, being an antinatalist doesn't mean that you should or have to kill yourself. I've got a video on that on the channel that you can check out. It's called "Why Don't Antinatalists Kill Themselves?" or "Why Antinatalists Don't Kill Themselves," whichever way around. And then on this X thing, it says, with a face like that, the original decision must have been involuntary.
The original decision must have been involuntary. In other words, nothing new under the sun. In 1984, I and my then partner completed our master's thesis defending abortion and euthanasia. 2 years later, we had managed to publish them as a book, and its publicity created a small to medium-sized media frenzy for a while. In the Helsinki News, a letter to the editor posited that following our logic, the entire human race could be eradicated, the title of the letter. Which is kind of funny, because I woke up to the idea of extinction only more than a decade later. I was in an academic meeting in Cowbridge, Wales, with my then partner, different from the previous one, and one night in November 1998 we discussed the plight of the world. What can be done to end all this suffering? Button, we decided, in an exchange that we have ever since referred to as the Cowbridge Diaries. And the family photo album has a picture of me sitting on what the caption calls the button bed. By which we meant, of course, the thought experiment. You can end all suffering in the world by pressing the big red button that instantaneously removes all sentient life. Do you press it? You can find out my answer in our conversation with Amanda in the Exploring Antinatalism podcast episode 65 at about 22 minutes. But the real beef was yet to come. We had moved to the northwest of England, and then in 2004 I published this. A rational cure for pre-reproductive stress syndrome.
Just in case anyone is wondering, this paper is freely available online, so you can just type in the name, the title, and you can download it for free. It's not behind a paywall. At least as far as I remember. I mean, I'm pretty sure I downloaded it for free.
I had just learned about the importance of citations and decided to create a site.
Yes, Matti says it is. He says it is now, so I guess maybe it wasn't before, but it got released from paywall.
Citation bait to boost my own. Half jokingly, I presented the desire to have children as a medical condition, pre-reproductive stress syndrome, and suggested that it could be cured by simple cognitive therapy by telling people that having children is irrational and immoral. Or, as I put it in the shortest of abstracts ever,
Since human reproduction is arguably both irrational and immoral, those who seek help before conceiving could be advised it is all right not to have children.
I offered the paper to the New England Journal of Medicine, one of the biggest medical journals, and received a prompt rejection. We thank you for your contribution, but it's not really in our domain. Luckily, I had friends in the Journal of Medical Ethics, and there it went.
That's interesting. I wonder if it probably was more common for antinatalist submissions to get rejected in the past, because, I mean, things seem to be, more open now, at least in some ways. But also the fact that now we have journals like the Journal of Controversial Ideas, which, if anyone doesn't know, it's an academic journal like any other, but you can publish under a pseudonym. So it means that, people are not scared to publish on certain topics out of fear of being cancelled or, tarring their name and stuff like that. So, it's good that that's around to allow people to talk about controversial things like antinatalism. And actually, in the most recent edition of the Journal of Controversial Ideas, I haven't read them yet, but there were 3 articles on antinatalism in that one publication. And I'm pretty sure in some way David Benatar is involved. I think I read when it first. Maybe he's an advisor on there or something like that. I can't remember. I mean, don't take my word for it. But I'm pretty sure when it first got announced as a new journal, I read that David Benatar was on some sort of thing involved with it. But it was founded by 3 main people, one of them being Peter Singer. Cool.
In the paper, which is now known as the original source for the risk argument for antinatalism, I actually presented two such arguments and caused much confusion, not least to myself. The first was based on maximin rationality. You know, the John Rawls idea that decisions should be for the best of those who are worst off. This is how I formulated my case.
When people consider the possibility of having children, they confront the following choice. They can decide not to have children, in which case nobody will be harmed or benefited. The value of this choice, in terms of the potential future individuals and their lives, is zero. Alternatively, they can decide to have children, in which case the new individual can be born. If this happens, the life of the future individual can be good or bad. The eventual value of the decision, depending on the luck of the reproducers, can be positive, zero, or negative. Since it is rational to avoid the possible negative outcome when the alternative is zero, it is rational to choose not to have children.
And because I love drawing pictures of everything, here is the same in visual form. The choice then is to have a child or not to have a child. Not having a child leads to no life, the value of which is zero. Having a child can lead to the emergence of a relatively good life, the value of which can be seen as positive. But it can also lead to the creation of a very bad life, and the value then is negative.
So it's interesting. So you can see here how the different arguments for antinatalism sort of diverge from one another, because obviously this is not like taking into account the asymmetry that Benatar puts forward in Better Never to Have Been, because obviously he would dispute the fact that a good life is sort of positive value in terms of it can be a good thing to bring them into existence. Now, maybe that's not exactly what Matti is saying here, and I'm not saying that he believes that. I don't know either way. But it's just that this argument is saying one specific thing. And then you have other arguments to say other things, but, you know, they can be complementary to each other. You know, you've also got the consent argument. But also it just, you know, made me think of the asymmetry argument, because it's talking here about the positive value of a good life. Anyway.
According to the maximin rule, I argued, avoiding the worst possible outcome, the bringing into existence a life of negative value, suggests that the child should not be had. To which my many critics then and now have responded that since extremely few lives are horribly bad, this is irrational timidity. Perhaps in anticipation of this critique, I also launched another argument in the paper, this one based on negative utilitarian morality. Looking back, I presented it unclearly, or at least in too many words. And since we don't have to repeat that mistake, here is the message stripped of all the confusing extras.
I believe it is morally wrong to cause avoidable suffering to other people. Since all human beings suffer at some point in their lives, every parent who could have declined to procreate is to blame.
And to the drawing board. The preliminaries are the same as in the maximin case. We can have a child or not to have a child, resulting in no life or a relatively good life or a very bad life. No life implies no suffering, a relatively good life some suffering, and a very bad life much suffering. According to negative utilitarianism, we should not contribute to creating suffering, so we shouldn't have the child. To which my critics have responded that while much suffering should probably be avoided, some suffering is inevitable in human lives, so stop whining about it and get on with your life. Antinatalists saying this, that and the other to mitigate the objection, but in the majority of human minds it stands. And this brings us to the topic of this presentation, the Omelas argument introduced by Amanda and me in the book. The risk argument for antinatalism number 3, the Omelas child.
Okay. I'm gonna try and make a guess now on how this is going to be presented, because it's been a while since I actually still, and I have to apologize, I actually still have not read the full book. I've read most of it now, but I have not read all of it. which is completely on me because I know it's a short book. And it was a while since I read the last bit that I read. So for anyone that doesn't know, and I'm assuming maybe Matti is going to explain some of this, but Omelas is referring to a city. So, oh wait, let me just bring myself. So yeah, Omelas is referring to a city. So, Ursula K. Le Guin wrote a book, or not book, but short story called "The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas," and the very basics of it is there's this city. And Anna just said that she listened to the audiobook. I actually didn't realize there was an audiobook of it, but yeah, that's cool. What I'll do is I'll try and get the audiobook link to where you can buy it, or maybe it's freely available on YouTube. I don't know, and I'll try and remember to put it in the description. So, but yeah, I mean, I was just thinking even the audiobook must only be like 10 minutes long because it's so short. Anna, how long was the audiobook? It must only be like 10 minutes or something like that. But anyway, so the basic story is there's this city where basically everything is amazing. You know, the population have really, you know, enjoyable lives. There's festivals all the time. You know, at the start of the story, she goes into explaining, you know, all the goodness in this city and stuff. And everyone there is happy. Apart from, there is one child who lives... and Anna says it's on YouTube. Nice. I'll find it and put it in the description. There's one child beneath the city in a basement who suffers and has an awful life, right? And she doesn't explain the mechanism, but it's just for the sake of the story. The happiness that is present in the city and the good lives that everyone has is dependent on the suffering of the child. So if that child wasn't suffering, this amazing city couldn't function, couldn't work, wouldn't exist. And the inhabitants of the city are aware of this. They know the child exists. Some of them from time to time actually go down and see the child. Not all of them, but some of them go down and actually look at the child. And then, you know, many of them will go back just to, you know, ignore that, go back to living their good life and stuff. But some of them leave Omelas. And this is why it's called The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas. Now, the ones who walk away from Omelas, they then don't have as joyful lives as in the city of Omelas. Once they leave their lives, I can't remember if she says their lives then become bad or they're just sort of like mediocre or acceptable, but they're not as good anyway compared to what they were in Omelas. But people make that trade because they don't want their enjoyment and their good lives to come at the cost of, you know, that child suffering, basically. And this is the basic story, and it's been used very widely in discussions around ethics. It's been used in discussions around antinatalism. It's been used in discussions on veganism and animal rights. It's been used on discussion on global supply chains, and, you know, like sort of anti-capitalist critiques. So it's had a very, very wide, you know, it's very well known in like philosophy and ethics. It's has a wide application and people apply it to lots of different issues. And yeah, it's a very interesting story. But anyway, so I think what Matti is maybe going to do here is say that when you have a child, you are unlocking essentially you're opening a door to future generations that come down from your lineage. So it will start like this and then it will go out because your children will have children, blah blah blah. So the amount of people that you're actually ultimately responsible for creating, which would be your children, their children, blah 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 blah, as it goes on, will expand over time as the generations go on. And they can maybe be seen as like the city of Omelas, if you assume they all have good lives, which obviously isn't going to be the case, but for the sake of argument. in those generations, there are going to be individuals, or, you know, if we want to make it exactly like Omelas, at least one individual that will have an awful life. And you opening that door with the knowledge that those good lives are going to come at the cost of the bad lives, you know, you opening the door, you know, there's going to be lives that the average person would consider good, but then also a life that would just be atrocious. I think this is where the Omelas argument is maybe coming from. You know, it's essentially the Omelas of future generations that you're making comes at the cost of the child in the basement, which are the children in those generations that have an awful life. Now, there's two things I want to say here. The first one, assuming I've, you know, accurately represented it. The first one is that I think it's a completely valid argument, and it's one I've used myself. It's one I've made a video about. But what is actually the case is that reality is actually much worse than that, because in the ones who walk away from Omelas, Omelas is a city containing people who have amazing, blissful lives, and there's one child who has an awful life. But in reality, with the generations that we create, it contains many, many people who have awful lives, and things happen to them that we would never want to happen to ourselves or anyone else. So there are many people, not just one. And what is this for? Is this for a city where everyone else's life is blissful? No. It's for everyone else who like has mediocre lives. There will be some people who will have like really good lives. You know, these will be people who they find their passion, they find the right person, you know, they have a long relationship with that person while they do everything they enjoy their whole life. This is not most people. Some people will achieve that, you know, a life that maybe some people can say that that's what it would have been like in Omelas. Most people will just have mediocre lives, you know. So the situation is actually much worse than presented in Omelas. There are many people having awful lives so that everyone else can have mediocre lives, and some people can have very good lives, you know. So that's one thing I wanted to say. The other thing I wanted to say was there's an interesting, like, I don't know if you'd call it critique, but there's an interesting thing that some people say about the story of the ones who walk away from Omelas, that some people say, not everyone would accept this, but some people say that there is actually no, because in the framing of that story, it's kind of natural for people to look at those ones who walk away from Omelas and say, you know, they're doing a good thing, a virtuous thing. And perhaps someone could say it's virtuous, but saying it's a good thing, some people disagree with that, because they say, well, actually, if you walk away from Omelas, what have you changed? You haven't changed anything. Like, the child is still suffering intensely in the basement. You just worsening your own life has no impact on that. You know, it doesn't lead to anything better happening. And so what they do is these people raise this point of like, they shouldn't walk away from Omelas. They should actually try and change Omelas from within, or leave Omelas and come back and try and change it from the outside. Which the analogy being, you know, essentially we should do activism or do good in the world, or however you want to say it. Which is an interesting sort of addition to the story. I don't know if Matti will get into that here. But anyway, before we continue, because I've just talked for quite a while, let's see what people are saying in the chat. So Matti says, we can stop now. That was perfect. Okay, so I got it right. Nice one. And Scuzzle is new to the chat. Welcome, Scuzzle. Scuzzle says, all life is better than not life, regardless what the social morals you follow. Yeah, I'm not going to get into a whole... I mean, you've heard what I have to say on the topic of the live show. I'm not going to get into a whole debate about antinatalism here. But feel free to go watch a range of my other videos. There's loads of stuff in there. Then Cami says, my guess is procreation is equivalent of turning away from the child in Omelas, forcing suffering onto children for the pleasures of others, the parents, society, humanity, etc. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Cool. Okay, let's continue.
And once you have heard the argument, quite possibly the darkest there is against having children, you will wonder what these two nincompoops are grinning about. So let's take this step by step and first reiterate why there is a need for another argument. And here we go. As a background factor, extant justifications for antinatalism, those that don't involve the concept of risk, do not convince people.
You know, this is an interesting one because I actually think that maybe this is the wrong approach. I'm not saying it is the wrong approach because I don't know, but maybe this is the wrong approach. And I actually remember when I interviewed Matti and Amanda, they asked me for my feedback, and I gave them some feedback, and I don't think I said this because I just didn't occur to me at the time. But I was just thinking, so this thing here about so the existing justifications for antinatalism are not convincing people. And so we need, like a new argument. So it could be the case that someone comes up with a new argument that is going to be like unusually good at convincing people to become antinatalist or just generally not procreate. But that may actually not be the best way of going about it, because if, we have several arguments by now, and if you're just talking about convincing someone not to be an antinatalist, but just someone not to procreate, there are a further, larger category of arguments or reasons to convince someone not to procreate. And given that the assessment has been that the existing justifications for antinatalism don't convince people, it may not actually be the best thing to try and come up with more arguments that are going to convince people. Although I'm not discouraging people from doing that. I think people should spend their time in productive ways, but in productive ways that, are not, they enjoy. And if someone enjoys coming up with new arguments, then it could be a very good pursuit, because you could come across an argument that does, actively persuade people. But I was just thinking, given the fact that we have so many arguments already and they don't tend to be generally convincing to the average person, does that tell us that there is an argument out there, we just haven't found it yet, that will be more convincing or very convincing? Or is it just that arguments in general are not going to do it? They're not going to cut it. Because I'm just thinking about it now, and when it's, when Matti says all the justifications or arguments we have aren't working, it doesn't pop into my head of we need to find another one. It pops into my head of maybe we need to take a different tact, because ultimately what is the point of coming up with these arguments? It's so that we can essentially, how it's going to cash out is we want less beings to come into existence. We don't want someone to create a child. But you don't need to convince someone of antinatalism to do that. Maybe the best way that we can spend our time, and I'm saying maybe because this is not how I spend all my time, so but perhaps rather than coming up with new arguments, which I'm not saying we shouldn't, you can spend your time doing that, that's completely fine. But maybe what we should be more focusing on is thinking about what are other ways that we can have that influence on people. One of them being setting up organizations or donating to current organizations that work with people or try to influence people in such a way where they have less children. There are already, groups that do that. And I know some people are going to be watching this smiling because I'm like a broken record of we need to donate more to certain organizations that worked in such a way that it decreases births. One being Family Empowerment Media, but there are many other organizations that have such an impact in the world that it's likely it would reduce the amount of births that happen. But there will be many other ways as well, One way could be like working to establish support networks for existing antinatalists, because then you know, convincing someone to, that antinatalism is making a good point, or that they should maybe take it on, is one thing. So I'll just bring it to me, and I'm also going to just bring that over. That's one thing, but it's another thing to actually have someone retain their antinatalism and actually make that decision not to procreate, you know, because people don't just run on logic, they don't just run on rationale, they also run on emotion and social pressure and you know, what are their peers doing and stuff. So that could also be an equally good pursuit of or that could be equally beneficial. Like, the arguments generally aren't working. I could spend my time coming up with another argument, or I could spend my time, coming up with a way of those who we do convince building some sort of structure, or working on some sort of structure that helps them maintain that decision, basically, if you get what I mean. So it's very interesting that Matti and Amanda came up, assessed this situation of the current arguments aren't working, and their mind went to, we need to come up with a new argument, which I understand that's a very, natural thought pattern to take. But I just wanted to add that additional thing in there of it doesn't, just because all the existing arguments don't really work in terms of convincing people en masse, that doesn't necessarily mean that we should try and come up with a new argument. It could mean that we just need to change tact generally. But nonetheless, I'm glad that they do this work to come up with the new arguments, because I find it interesting, and also it is still a worthwhile pursuit, in my opinion, to come up with new arguments, because you may come up with an argument that convinces more people, but it also just generally produces more ideas and content around antinatalism, which will hopefully mean more people will engage with it. Cool. Let's continue.
The main one is an appeal to the poor quality of human or sentient existence. All lives are miserable, so let's not create any. Well, Amanda and I agree with this, and so do all other 17 hardcore antinatalists. But ask a person in the street, ask you for that matter, and the likeliest answer is, I'm fine, thank you, don't worry about me, and so will my children be, so...
I've just seen in the chat, Matti is saying, I formulate these to understand why or whether and how I'm an antinatalist. I'm just a philosopher, you activist, you. No, of course, I'm not saying any of what I just said as a critique. I value, the production of new arguments, including the production of this new argument. And I understand why, your natural thought pattern was to come up with a new argument. And this isn't a criticism of doing that at all. I just find it interesting. And obviously it makes sense because you're a philosopher. This is where your mind would have gone to make a new argument. But I just find it interesting that, or I wanted to make the point that an assessment that arguments aren't working is not necessarily one that should lead us to the conclusion of making more arguments. It may also mean that we just have to reassess generally. That was the only point I was making, but yes.
Don't worry about them either. We'll manage. The other main argument for antinatalism is from the obvious lack of consent. They cannot give their permission to be born, so who are we to force them to exist? To which any philosopher will answer, they cannot give their permission not to be born either, so who are we to deny them existence? Not a road to be traversed all that easily. The remaining main argument for antinatalism is an appeal to the risk involved in reproduction. As we have seen, however, previous attempts do not seem to have convinced people. Maximin. Well, a truly awful life is too improbable to count, it seems. and negative utilitarianism, fails, opponents say, because there is no life without suffering. But let's stop there for a while. There is no life without.
So just very quickly on that roundup of the arguments. So I actually agree. Antinatalism as a topic, it's actually not that easy to convince someone, because it's a topic that deals with the concept of non-existence and all of this sort of stuff. It is actually relatively, unless someone already has a sort of what's the term? Unless someone is like naturally prone to agree with the position or already has these like feelings innately, it is actually quite difficult to convince someone of the antinatalist point of view. It's not impossible, because I'm a case in point. I mean, I did not have these feelings at all. I was just convinced by, listening to someone explain it. But that doesn't seem to me to be relatively common. Or maybe I'm just shit at it and I've just had hardly any success. It seems like people who will agree with antinatalism generally just have they're predisposed to it anyway, rather than they thought the opposite, or they just didn't really think anything about it and they then become convinced. So I actually agree that generally the arguments are not that they generally don't seem to be that successful. But then it's, difficult. What are we comparing it to? Like, what is the bar for a successful argument? Like, does it have to convince everyone? That seems very unreasonable. Does it have to convince half of people? That also seems to be quite a high bar. Yeah, so I don't know what bar we would measure it against, but also I think Matti is kind of talking himself down when he talks about the risk argument, because I would say the risk argument is probably the easiest to understand for people, which I think is works in its favor. And in my experience, it's probably been the one that people resonate with the most. That's probably because it's the one they understand more, because it's easier to understand. But also, I do know people who are not antinatalist, but they understand, they completely get where the risk argument is coming from. And yeah, so I think maybe Matti is talking himself down and the risk argument down a bit. I do think it is actually fairly decent when it comes to getting people to really understand what you're talking about and maybe convincing people. But I agree, just trying to, as an intellectual thing, trying to essentially using the bridge of argument to get to the other side of this canyon between you and another person to influence their behavior, which is ultimately what we want to do, generally doesn't seem to be that successful. But anyway, let us continue. Where am I getting this up? Boom.
Suffering, from which pronatalists or natalists or reproducers or whatever they choose to call themselves deduce that it's all right to create new, painful, anguished lives. A different conclusion could of course be drawn, as did Arthur Schopenhauer, who in his The Blessed Calm of Non-Existence in 1851 opined,
If children were brought into the world by an act of pure reason alone, would the human race continue to exist? Would not a man rather have so much sympathy for the coming generation as to spare it the burden of existence, or at any rate not take it upon himself to impose that burden upon it in cold blood?
accompanied later by animal rights activist and anarchist Marie Huot.
Oh, I'm so glad to see she's being used. So this is from, the reason I'm excited is because, and let me just get my thing up. So yeah, the reason I'm excited is because, I recently did a video, which I am just trying to get up on my phone to show to camera. So, no, that's not the best way to do it. Let me just get it up on here. So, oh, fuck it. I'll just link it in the description. But basically, I made this video recently with the help of some, very hardworking and intelligent people. Karima Kerma helped me, and two other French speakers who I will not name because I don't know if they would like to be named here. But yes, with the help of others, did a video on Marie Yu, who was a French antinatalist from back in the day. She did a lecture in Paris in 1892 on antinatalism, amongst other things. And, there's a lot of information. There is actually a decent amount of information out there about her, but most of it, the vast majority of it, is not in English. And it is not, an antinatalist narrative has not been put to it. So there has been a lot of discussion around her on her views on animal rights, because she was pro-animal rights. And there's been discussion around her feminist views as well, because she was quite influential in the sort of realm of feminism. But whilst some people have commented on her antinatalist views, to my knowledge, my video is the first place that someone has really brought a comprehensive overview of her antinatalist views together and narrativized it. And yeah, I'm assuming that Matti got this quote and the inspiration of including Marie Yu from my video. So I hope I'm not unduly claiming influence here, but I'm glad that she's been included because she is a very interesting and worthwhile person to learn about. But anyway, let's continue. So and sorry as well, the lecture I was talking about in 1892, this quote that Matti is talking about is from that lecture.
Who in the pain of living...
Why is it gone full screen? Hang on, let me just get this back. I don't know why it did that. And there we go.
Living 1892 lamented the human insistence on living despite knowing that life basically sucks.
Just a very quick correction though. So the lecture was in 1892, but The Pain of Living, which was a pamphlet that was released later on, which was an approximate written version of the lecture, that was actually released in 1909, from memory.
He's evil.
Still, if man only accepted this burden for himself, he could be forgiven. But he cowardly obeys his instinct and perpetuates the cursed heritage by giving life to beings who did not ask to be born. More often than not, he commits this homicide unconsciously, but when he premeditates the crime, no punishment is severe enough to make him atone for it.
There are contemporary antinatalists like Karima Kerma and Lawrence
Out of any picture Matti could have used of me, he chose that one. Don't worry, Matti, I won't hold it against you.
Anton, who keep digging for these historical gems and feeding the hungry antinatalist community with them. Brilliant work, meaningful for pessimists, anarchists and other dissenters.
Thank you so much.
Only dismissed by the more life and order hugging moral majority. And so, on we go to our argument. It is based on Ursula K. Le Guin's 1973 science fiction short story, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas. And this is how the story goes.
And also, if Matti is still watching, I'm not sure if he's still watching, because I know he's a fan of the red button. And he'll maybe remember this from the video, but I believe that Marie Yu was maybe the first person ever, at least recorded, to say that they would press the red button. And Matti's here. Yeah, if anyone wants to learn a tiny bit about the history of the red button, they can watch my video on it called Why Antinatalists Should Stop Talking About the Red Button, which is very ironic because I'm talking about it now. And as a result of that video, there was much discussion around it, including discussion from Matti, which I found very funny, but also interesting. But anyway, let's continue.
Omelas is a utopian town where everybody is happy. There is no injustice, there is only eternal bliss. Except that to uphold the serenity and bliss, the townspeople have to keep one child in perpetual filth, darkness and misery. When the citizens are old enough to know the truth, the child is made known, shown to them. After the initial shock, most of them accept the situation, but some, as signaled in the title of the story, walk away. And to translate this into our video abstract language, by having children, reproducers open up the route to the creation of an individual with a miserable life sometime in the future. This individual, so to speak, is the Omelas child. And the reproducers, all reproducers, are its creators and responsible for it. To repeat the message step by step, this is what we are saying to people who consider having progeny. Your children may be happy. Their children may also be happy. But in time someone in a reproductive line will be unhappy. The line you start is no exception to this. By starting a line, you create an Omelas child. That child will then pay for everybody else's bliss. To which, if you are anything like the standard reproducer that we have encountered, you will say, but it's not my fault, is it? It may never happen, you say. It's so far away, you say. I only meant well, you say. It's important to me, you say. And then, if you are a philosopher or theologian, you can add a few other things. Sacrifices are noble. Collateral damage always.
That excuse of sacrifices are noble is such a bullshit one, because sacrifice can be noble, but it's only noble if it's a sacrifice you take on yourself. You know, it's noble, you know, in some ways for someone to take on a sacrifice themselves for the benefit of others. But what's happening here, obviously, is that they are sacrificing someone else, which is not noble at all. For example, if you're in some sort of war situation and I don't know, let's say you're in like a stalemate and there's you know, the one army and the other army, they're in trenches and communications are broken down, and one person from the other side has got to go through no man's land and get to the other army and tell them, like, you know, look, we're happy to stop fighting and let's, you know, let's end it now. To elect yourself as that person who goes across no man's land to stop the fighting, that's clearly a sacrifice. You're sort of sacrificing yourself, even though there's not a guarantee of death. You are making a sacrifice in terms of taking on this big burden and this big risk for the benefit of the collective, not just, you know, your boys next to you, but also to the benefit of those who are shooting at you, because once they get the news that, you know, you want to stop fighting, many of them will survive that would have been killed otherwise. So yeah, that's a noble form of self-sacrifice, you know. But if if someone were to just pick the person next to them and force them out into no man's land and say, go or I will shoot you, they're imposing that sacrifice on someone else, and that is completely not noble. Yes, obviously this is not what Matti was saying, but what I'm saying is someone who would say that sacrifices are noble in response to the point that Matti is making is just complete bullshit.
It's a curse. It's still a life. And life has meaning. Let's take a closer look at these one by one.
Oh, right, now he's going to go over them, so maybe he's just going to repeat what I've just said.
It may never happen, by which we can mean at least two things. Parents can tell their children not to reproduce, and the line will be broken while it's still more or less controllable. In theory they can, but will they? Parents telling their children not to have children are essentially saying that they have made a mistake and that it would be better if their children would never have come to exist. Not a very good topic for a family conversation. And besides, are they even allowed to do so? They would be denying their children the whatever benefits that they have themselves gained by reproducing, and that has a distinctly egoistic ring to it. In the really optimistic scenario, of course, parents can hope, maybe even believe, that their child will invent a cure for cancer or in other ways remove future suffering. Their child might indeed invent a cure for cancer, but is the probability high enough to justify the choice? And there is more suffering in the world than that. The one child will not remove it all. I only meant well. One side of this objection concerns parental
What do they say about good intentions? The road to hell is paved with them.
expectations and their fulfillment. My family, community, society, friends and peers wanted me to have the child, so I had it. To which the proper response might be,
Congratulations! On the orders of others, you have now created one more producer, consumer, and soldier to serve the capitalist, consumerist system, and to act as cannon fodder for the military-industrial complex.
for some,
Which is very interesting. Just going back to Maria Yu again. She actually made antinatalist arguments. So she linked anti-militarism and antinatalism. She used to advocate non-reproduction as a means of not two things: one, not funding war, but also sparing those future people who would go on to die in war. As in the soldiers that would be birthed. And she actually, in one of her articles, I think it was maternity, but I can't remember if it was that one. She likened the production of children who would then go on to fight in wars to an industrial production line, which I have heard in the research that I was reading that was a very novel comparison there, and that she was maybe the first one to do it, and it really caught on at the time, and many people started to make that comparison. And it's very common as well now, not to directly link births with that, but to essentially emphasize the industrial scale meat grinder of war on human life. And one very recent artistic sort of display of this is at the start of the new German film All Quiet on the Western Front, which was on Netflix. At the start of it, it shows the industrial process of a soldier dying, and then his clothes being taken back behind the lines and washed and stitched up, and then given to a new recruit who then dons that kit. So it shows this industrial sort of production line nature of war. So it's still a very common thing to do now, and it's interesting that Matti and Amanda sort of mentioned that here, and it's something that Maria, you also sort of touched on.
of course, this would be a proper compliment. Be that as it may, I only meant well can also be future individual related. I didn't intend to create a miserable life. That came about, if it did come about, as an undesired and unintended side effect. The neo-Thomistic Roman Catholic doctrine of double effect gives one formulation of this. When you are trying to do good, you can allow some bad second effects if you don't know for sure that they will occur. Interpretations vary, But I would like to think that this road has been closed by the Omelas argument. There will be an individual with a miserable life in the future, and we cannot unintend that by holding our breath or putting our head in the sand. It's so far away. The point here is that for merely possible future harm we must use a discount rate, give more weight to the almost sure happiness of our children and the quite probable happiness of their children, than to the uncertain unhappiness of some distant people. Well, apart from removing or at least seriously distancing future generations from moral considerations, this objection does not, I think, apply to the Omelas type scenario. Someone will suffer. It's a certainty, not a possibility. Hence no discount rate is needed. I may be wrong here. Let me let you in on a secret at this point. All the 8 pronatalist points presented in this mega slide and all my responses to them are explications of the main question Amanda and I pose in this presentation. Does the Omelas argument for antinatalism stretch the concept of responsibility too far? In this particular case, I am at the same time certain and uncertain about our own claim. Can we say that the eventual existence of the Omelas child is an inevitable fact? After all, anything can happen. Maybe against all odds, the parents will bring their children up as antinatalists. Maybe all suffering will miraculously be removed before the bad card is turned. Maybe a meteorite will wipe out all life. Who knows? My interpretation, our interpretation here is that the certainty is in the opening the door for the possibility. Is that enough? Opinions are, I suppose, bound to vary. Anyway, moving on. We have many more objections to sieve through here. The eventual emergence of the miserable life will not touch any of us, so why care? I don't know how that sounds to you. It's true, of course, but does it have a never mind the future generations ring? And that's not really on, is it? It's important to me is gaining ground as one of the most popular excuses for reproducing. Children give my life meaning, the line usually goes. And that, of course, is fine and well.
The sort of I don't want to get like too morbid or too like I don't know if someone would call it like overly pessimistic or like cynical, but like a sort of framing that I've been thinking about recently, and I'm sure I'm not the first person to see it in this frame, of like when people say yeah, Matti's saying it's nice to see me and move to evade the text. Yeah, I just like I moved myself so that you could see the thing that was going to pop up. But I actually think now that they're going to come down this right-hand side. So I've just moved myself into the path of the new text. But anyway, yeah, when people say that like their children will give them meaning or happiness or this sort of thing. Now, I understand. I'm not trying to be in any way like a bad guy who's trying to really demonize people's meaningful relationships with their children. Like, look, once a child exists, try and have as meaningful a relationship with them as possible, not just to your benefit, but so that the child has a meaningful relationship as well. Have a relationship that is productive for the both of you. Try and give that child as good a life as possible and set them up to be independent in the best way you can. Obviously, that all goes without saying, although I've said it. But one way that I can't help but see that relationship in terms of the creator getting meaning and happiness from their child is, in a way, it's almost like a parasitic relationship, because you are sort of in the same way that, for example, I'm really not trying to use imagery that's going to like make it seem like I'm demonizing parents, because I'm really not trying to demonize parents in any way. And I also know that there are antinatalist parents, you know, and I don't want to demonize their relationships, but and I actually also don't view it in the same way with antinatalist parents, because antinatalist parents have recognized the sort of ethical implications of what has been done, and you've just got to, moving forward, like now you've created the child, so you know you've got to make sure that they have a good life to whatever degree you can, and also, you know, try and have a good time while for yourself as well. But yeah, I can't help but see the relationship in some way, at least when someone says, I had a child to give my life meaning, or happiness, or that it has brought meaning and happiness to me. I can't help seeing it, but like a parasitic relationship where you create someone so that you can essentially fulfill your need and desire for meaning and happiness. You know, like you sort of feed off them in that way. Which I know is a bit of a morbid way of putting it. But it just really strikes me of like, you know, all of us are in this predicament where we are meaning seekers. We all need meaning in our lives. And, you know, some people opt to just create someone else and impose suffering and death on them so that they can feed off them in such a way where they, you know, they essentially satiate their need for meaning. Anyway, I don't really know why I was waffling about that, but that's just like a framing that I've kind of seen, that when it came up on screen about, you know, my children giving my life meaning, like that was just, it just came into my head of like, that's a, you know, sort of like a framing that's been coming to mind recently. You know, it's almost like they're describing themselves as a parasite in some way, but yeah, anyway.
Seeking meaning for your life, except perhaps not so much at the expense of future individuals. Does your meaning-seeking justify the creation of an Omelas child? Or, to put this in other words, does reproductive self-interest really trump everything else? Maybe it does. Not for me, but oh well. That concluded the set of more parent-oriented objections to our argument. The other set concentrates on the lot of the child, the first one being that sacrifices are noble. This is a line of argument that actually travels from other galaxies, the most notable being the galaxy of Star Trek, the TV and movie saga. In the pivotal scene, the science officer of Starship Enterprise, Mr. Spock, is dying in isolation because, if let out, he could contaminate the rest of the crew with a deadly virus. He decides to sacrifice himself, and has a mimic exchange with his superior and friend Captain Kirk. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, or the one. Fine cinematic moment, fine utilitarian confession of faith, but the Omelas child we are talking about is not Mr. Spock, not an existing voluntary self-sacrifice maker, but an involuntary object of other people's decision-making.
That is a much simpler example to use than the one I used of someone running across no man's land in a war.
Changing tack reproducers can argue that whatever appeal Ursula K. Le Guin's fiction may have, in real life, even the worst life is still a life. I have done some work on this argument over the years, and it seems to me that it's based on a specific and possibly mistaken idea of the value of human life. People who root for reproduction, pronatalists, tend to think that the value of life ranges from very good, full positive, to close to zero. Most lives, however, are very good or at least quite good, and the lower end is an exception, may be the case when rare individuals claim to have truly horrible wrongful lives and sue their parents for being alive. Antinatalists more naturally believe that human life is nothing much to write home about. The most famous antinatalist philosopher of our time, David Benatar, is on record saying that even the best lives are very bad. And of course worse lives are even worse, approaching full negative value, however that is defined. I am myself on record as a hedonistic pessimist, thinking that the value of my life as a whole remains below zero, although not always as much as Benatar claims. Our self-evaluations, however, are beside the point here. And the point is that when the full range from negative to positive is recognized, it is easier to understand that the Omelas child's life quality can be unequivocally bad, irredeemable by the insistence that it's still alive. It is still alive, but that speaks against rather than for allowing its existence. An appeal to the realities of life pops up next. Collateral damage occurs, meaning that everything we do has consequences. Count far enough into the future and someone is harmed by any action or inaction we take. Life would be impossible without it. Now this is obviously true, but possibly irrelevant in our context. I'll return to this after the last objection box of this slide, which is that life has meaning. Since this is another main theme of antinatalism, extinction, and the end of procreative self-corruption, I'm not dwelling in it here. It's the topic of another presentation. But instead, I refer to Ursula K. Le Guin to make a quick point. She writes,
They all know it is there, all the people of Omelas. Some of them have come to see it. Others are content merely to know it is there. They all know that it has to be there. Some of them understand why and some do not, but they all understand that their happiness, the beauty of their city, the tenderness of their friendships, the health of their children, the wisdom of their scholars, the skill of their makers, even the abundance of their harvest, and the kindly weathers of their skies, depend wholly on this child's abominable misery.
which leads me at least to ask, to whom does the life have meaning? Not to the child, surely. If to the parents, is this relevant? But as I said, this is a whole other can of worms, and I will not open the lid anymore. But I promised some more reflection on the collateral damage or everything has consequences point, so here goes. We live in this world with billions of other people. Many of them are in dire need, but we cannot respond to every need in the world. We don't have the resources. We cannot be, in an action-prompting sense, morally responsible. If we were, we would have to accept a ridiculously strict view of our liability, expressed in its extreme form by Fyodor Dostoevsky in The Brothers Karamazov. Father Zosima states,
There is only one way to salvation, and that is to make yourself responsible for all men's sins. As soon as you make yourself responsible in all sincerity for everything and everyone, you will see at once that this is really so, and that you are in fact to blame for everyone and for all things.
This quote is standardly used to indicate that if you are responsible for everything, then you are not really responsible for anything. You just have to accept your guilt and throw yourself at the mercy of God. Against that view, more realistic for want of a better word, commentators say that there has to be a limit to our responsibility. The extent of that limit is a matter of dispute, but tentatively we can agree that our happy parents in the top middle are probably not responsible for all the need, frustration and misery of all the other billions of people that they share the planet with. But even so, they are responsible for the need, frustration and misery of the individuals they produce or conspire to produce into this world. The Omelas child is not collateral damage of their living their lives. It is the direct or indirect result of their moral choices. So our question here was, does the Omelas argument for antinatalism stretch the concept of responsibility too far? I say no, not necessarily. And the jovial nincompoops say no, not necessarily. And they invite you to read the book for further arguments if you are still in doubt. We welcome all comments, critical and otherwise, with thanks. Thank you.
There we go. So that was Matti's lecture. And one thing I also want to say, because in fact, what we will do is we will watch the video. So soon, on May the 15th, if I'm remembering correctly, there is going to be a launch event for their book. I'm just getting up the promotional video. Hang on. Yep, here we go. So let me just see if that fits okay. Boom. Yes, so that was Matti's lecture. Obviously, he mentions the book that him and Amanda have written in there, released by Cambridge Elements. On the 15th, they are having a launch event party where there's going to be a whole range of things going on there. And they've released like a little trailer for it. And we can quickly watch that now as well, and then we'll finish after that. But one thing I want to say is I can say this because it's announced in the trailer, but I will be featured in the launch event, but I actually don't remember how much information they give in the trailer, so I don't want to give any more information that they don't give, because they can put out stuff as and when they like. It's their event. So let's actually just watch the trailer and see what they say.
Ah, and so you've arrived. Welcome to Anti-Procreate, or the finest anti-procreate-ory in the world. Sir, madame, I will be your waiter today, and it is my great pleasure to serve you both. Would you both perhaps like to start off by seeing a copy of our menu? Perhaps you'd like to hear about our specials?
It's funny, anti-procreate-ory or whatever. It's funny because ages ago, when I was involved with the others setting up Antinatalism International, one of the ideas we had was to potentially sort of start some sort of antinatalist dating platform or something like that. And the idea itself didn't go anywhere, but we came up with like some names that it could potentially have, and some of them were quite funny. So there was Antinatal Lust, and then I've just thought of one now, which is actually no, would that even work? I was going to say Antidatalism, but that would imply that it's like, I mean, it's antinatalism with dating mixed in, but it's like that could imply being anti-dating because it's antidatalism. Let's see what people think in the chat. If you were going to create an antinatalist dating website, what would you call it? What name would you give it? And welcome to the chat, Syndicate. Also welcome to the chat, Chill. And John as well. Good to see you, John. And Robert as well. Welcome to the chat, everyone.
Tonight? Ah, excellent. Tonight we are serving an experience. Blue and green button surprise. This delicious anthropocentric delight, when pressed together, will produce irreversible collective infertility of humankind, as well as mankind making room for other species to inherit the earth after our demise. Oh, the aroma! Here, on the house. Bon appetit. Yes, that's right, sir. The buttons pressed just like that is really what brings out...
Oh, that's so funny. Amanda is Amanda wearing, I can't see, an apron maybe with the antinatalist logo on?
Well, perhaps I'll give you folks a little more time with your Oh, you'd like to know what this menu item is? Well, actually, this is from our secret menu. We're generally not allowed to talk about this menu item. It happens to be...
When I that's a good still as well to touch on. When I first watched this trailer and I saw this bit about we're not supposed to talk about it, I think that was a snipe at my video about why antinatalists shouldn't talk about the red button. And also there's an original essay by the same name by Andreas Moss. But yeah, I thought that was quite funny. I think they're referencing that, but I'm not quite sure.
Full favorite of mine. What's this? Oh, you'd like to speak to our chefs about it, to learn more. And what did you say? Oh, and you've heard about our party on May 15th in the Grand Anti-Procreate or Grand Dining Hall. Well, actually...
So Matti says in the chat, everything is about your videos. Yes, I know I have linked probably way too many things to my videos. And maybe I'm getting a bit big-headed. But yeah, I'll rein it in.
It just so happens that you're both invited. And so are you. Your invitations are in your menus. Let's learn all about it. Matti, Häyry, and Amanda Sukanik welcome you to our grand launch event for our book, Antinatalism, Extinction, and the End of Procreative Self-Corruption on May 15th. Featuring Lawrence Anton, the cosmic antinatalist Tejas, antinatalist philosopher and historian Karima Kerma, antinatalist philosopher Patricia McCormack, art, music, a giveaway contest, and more. Don't forget that you can read Antinatalism, Extinction.
Yes, so they mention that I'm going to feature, but they don't say exactly what, so I won't say exactly what I'm doing. But yes, look forward to it. Put it in your diary on May the 15th. And yeah, I will be, as soon as it is shared, I don't know if it's going to be pre-scheduled or just released at a certain point, but whatever happens, I will share it on my community tab. But you can make sure that you don't miss it just by going to the Exploring Antinatalism YouTube channel here and subscribing.
The End of Procreative Self-Corruption right now for free on the
and I see Dragon Ball Toys has joined. Well, also hello to Yaman in the chat as well. And Dragon Ball Toys, which is Amanda, has joined, says, I'm here now. So happy you didn't, Amanda didn't miss it all. Yes, it was a friendly snipe at your video. Yeah, I thought so. But more at Andreas.
.org website. Physical copies of the book can also be purchased in both hardcover and paperback, links below. Thank you again for dining at Anti-Procreator. Please do come again and see you on the 15th. I know you guys don't want me to press it, but you didn't say anything about eating it.
Yes, so that is the trailer for the launch event. So again, it's happening on the 15th for Amanda and Matti's book. It is just going to be streaming on the YouTube, so it's, you know, you don't need a ticket or anything like that. But yeah, that is everything. So I hope everyone enjoyed that. I hope everyone enjoyed watching Matti's lecture and the trailer for the upcoming launch event. I want to thank Matti for obviously doing the lecture, and Amanda as well, because they were both involved, and also Matti for presenting it originally, even though we didn't get to see, you know, the in-person version. I also believe Matti has recently been on a panel at there was a sort of a theatrical performance of a play that dealt with the topic of extinction, as far as I can remember, and Matti was invited to talk afterwards on a panel on stage. So yes, so Matti is firing on all cylinders at the moment, which is good to hear. And Amanda is also firing on all cylinders, even if not all of it is as public, but I'm sure we will see all the fruits of much of Amanda's work in the launch event. Yes, and if you want to see more about Matti's goings-on, being on stage and stuff like that, if you go to Tejas's channel, just type in Cosmic Antinatalist or Antinatalism this week. Tejas does some, I think Tejas's channel is one of the best channels on antinatalism at the moment, doing really good stuff, documenting all the things that are happening surrounding antinatalism each week. So go find his channel, and I can't remember which one it is, but go watch all of his videos, but go watch the last few, and one of them has updates on Matti being on stage at this play. So anyway, yes, thank you everyone for joining. I hope you enjoyed Matti's lecture and my sort of incoherent rambling thoughts on it, and look forward tomorrow to the first video coming out from my time in Vienna with Nimrod. It is the first video of multiple videos. I'm not exactly sure how many there will ultimately be, but there will definitely be 2 like properly edited ones, and then there will probably be some other ones which the footage is not as good, so I'll have to try and work it out. But yeah, look forward to that. That is tomorrow. Anyway, thanks everyone for watching, and I will see everyone in the next one.